Yes, I hit the proper button. And okay, so we're live and it's giving me a it's giving me an error, but I think everything yeah. I am going to check to make sure this is working properly really quick.
I got the alert.
Okay, cool. Okay, yeah, so it's live. It just YouTube is screaming at me a
Yay.
little bit because apparently one of my encoders put the wrong resolution for this, but it will work.
It's close enough.
Yeah, close enough for government work. Hello there, CJ Anger. I like that name. So, I am here with the great Eddie Romanov, and we're here to talk about audio and electrical engineering. And just all of this was kind of spurred on by rants we had in DH's Discord a while back. I can't even. I don't. Do you remember what brought that about?
Usually I start ranting about vacuum tubes and electrical engineering every time radionics comes up.
I feel. I feel like it might have had something to do with radionics. I remember the one part that the one part that stood out at me that just made me laugh was you made some comments along the lines of you kids these days don't even know what mid-range is. And talking about
They
the
don't. You don't.
it made me laugh because I originally came from guitar, and my biggest inspiration was Metallica, where to get that Metallica sound, you gotta crank that treble, you gotta crank that bass, and just scoop out all the mid range. It doesn't exist anymore. And then give it a couple of years when I matured as an artist, and I realized, oh no, that's the last thing you want to do. You want all that mid range.
Well, no, it's great if you want to sound like Metallica, but if you want to sound like, Iron Maiden, maybe you want a little more in mid-range. Sometimes you want to hear some attack on the strings.
Yeah, exactly. Plus, like, leave some room for the bassist in the frequency spectrum. Um,
Nobody cares about him anyway. That's my
um,
favorite bass player joke is my band had to cancel a gig because the drummer locked his keys in the car and it took us 3 days to get the bass player out.
somewhere Adam Neely is screaming. um, but yeah, when you were talking about I I feel like I'm gonna be heavily paraphrasing this. It might not be 100% accurate to what you said, but you made a comment about the way that things are mixed and mastered now, where instruments won't necessarily sound like the originals.
Yes.
And
Um, Everything is really over processed now. Um, and that's beyond the fact that a lot of music is done via samples now and synthesis and then more electronic stuff, which is fine. That's a creative decision. That's not an engineering decision.
mhm.
But you look at even the freshmen we have coming into school this year. Were born in 2002 or 2003,
Oh, that makes me feel so
and
old.
I know, and they've literally never heard music except possibly on a pair of cheap white earbuds, whatever came with their phone.
Yeah.
And because of that, the biggest problem in mastering right now is that basically everything is level compressed to within 6 dB of the top end of the range for whatever codec you're using. And then the generation slightly older, so more like your generation, you guys grew up on really cruddy MP3s
Mm-hmm.
that do exactly that same thing that Metallic is doing, where they leave the lowest frequency, they leave the highest frequency, and basically rip out everything in the middle for data compression reasons. And because psychoacoustically, you really only notice the top and the bottom most of the time. However, the compressor usually makes really cruddy decisions about what to rip out and what to leave.
Oh, you know what? While you're talking, I think it might actually be interesting. I know I pulled up FL Studio for a reason. Uh, I'll take a I'll take a song I was working on and I'll export it as an MP3 and then a wave so we can look at it side by side. Maybe even phase cancel them so we can see exactly what the MP3
Oh,
leaves out compared to lossless.
well, and try to use like the cruddiest MP3 settings that you can.
Yeah, okay.
I really want to hear that artifacting on the high end.
Okay, let's see. Let's just pull this one up. It's probably going to take a second. Yeah, for those of you that don't know, MP3 is a compressed audio file. So it takes up this much room on your hard drive, but it does that by sacrificing a lot of quality, whereas a wave is lossless and just sends out all the information. So it takes up this much room on your hard drive, but you get a lot better quality. So let
And
me.
MP4, which is almost what everything you hear now, no matter what streaming service you use, is. It's just they use slightly different compression algorithms. The compression algorithms are much better now. And personally, I think Apple's is the best, AAC. Um, but people have different things. All the compression algorithms are much better now, but like the old school MP3 one was just because what you have to remember is MP3 was designed for putting not just compressing audio for inclusion with heavily compressed video files that were running at like 640 by 480 on Web 1.0.
Mm-hmm.
It's because what MP3 actually stands for is MPEG Layer 3. So this was the high quality audio track to accompany really shitty web videos.
Oh, hey, I got a question for you. What type of bit rate do we want on this?
As low as possible.
Oh, are you sure? 32 kilobits?
Sure.
Oh, I'm gonna be a little bit more generous. I'm gonna go
Okay.
128.
Okay.
Lower than I'd normally do, but okay, let's do that. That should only take a second. And I'll do the same thing, but for wave.
And after this, we'll talk about what bitrate means.
Yeah, so I feel like I might be wrong on this. I think actually, you know what? I'm just gonna bring it up now. Bitrate refers to the different stages of volume. I've heard it compared to a flight of stairs, where the different range of volumes that it can actually represent is if you have an 8-bit range, then you only have 8 steps of volume.
No.
Really?
That's usually 8, 16, 24. Sometimes you see 32, but 64 or 24 is usually considered pretty good. Bit rate on compressors is talking about you are guaranteeing that the bit rate is going to be 128 bits per second on the output. But what we're really talking about here is akin to sample rate, which we'll talk about in more detail once we hear this, because hopefully you'll get to hear some of the effects that I'll be talking about.
Yeah. Oh, you know what? This might be a little bit funky for YouTube because YouTube compresses the audio by the time
Yeah,
you
well,
hear it too.
yeah.
So for anybody listening to us, bear in mind you're not going to hear all the crunchy details that we do. So let's go with the MP3 example first. This is nothing special. This is literally just a thing I did really quick the other day. Volume warning. This might be loud. We'll see if my levels held up.
I can't.
You can't hear it?
I cannot hear it.
Oh, damn it. Oh, hold on. I think I know what's wrong. Gotta do a quick fix. And where are you?
Oh yeah, this is that thing we ran into.
Yeah, I have to share my...
There we go.
Okay, so now you should be able to hear it. Hopefully we don't get echo for you. Okay, so here's the MP3 again. And here would be the uncompressed file.
I think your compressor is actually better than YouTube's. But yeah, because I'm hearing the compressed audio either way. It sounds pretty much the same. And honestly, on a lot of this stuff, short of doing what you were talking about, which is, phase reversing one of them and summing them, you really got to squint to find the difference.
Yeah, actually, because for me, admittedly, listening to that, I probably would not be able to tell right away, but side by side, I could tell you that I heard a little bit more high end off the uncompressed, but the main giveaway was the snare. I got more
Okay,
presence out
yes.
of that.
So snare and cymbal are the two things you want to listen to.
Hmm.
And then this is a great place to talk about bit rate, sample rate, and my first official bringing up of the term Nyquist theorem. So, Nyquist theorem, a sound wave has to be a complete cycle, right? You have to catch the speaker going out and the speaker coming back in. Right? You have to get the complete cycle. So what that means is if you've got, say, a sine wave, just a simple sine wave tone at, say, 200 hertz, okay? To capture that, you have to capture the high and the low.
Yep.
So that you have to sample twice per cycle. So to capture a frequency, a maximum frequency of 200 hertz, you have to sample at least 400 hertz, right?
Mm-hmm.
And for the nominal human audible range of 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz, that means you have to sample at least 40,000 hertz, right? 40K, to be able to capture the highs and lows of all the frequencies the human ear can theoretically hear, even though very few of us can ever hear up to around 20K. And anyone over the age of 30 is going to be lucky if they can hear above about 18. The problem with that is, so let's go back to our sine wave, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have your little sine wave. If you sample perfectly in phase, that's fine, right? Because you capture the very maximum and the very minimum voltage. But if your clock is slightly out of phase, right, what's going to happen is it's going to sample early or late, which means it's going to
it's going to clip it beyond zero.
Right. Well, it's going to clip it. It's going to reduce the overall voltage. It's going to the voltage it captures. And so what that means is if your sample rate is too low, the high frequencies start to roll off. So you'll see on the frequency response curve, once you start getting up above, towards the high end of the range, you'll start to drop off.
Mm-hmm.
And to compensate for that, back in the old days, some engineer made the brilliant decision to basically say, screw it, let's give it 20%. And so 20% extra headroom. And so 40K became 48K, which you will recognize from your audio encoding settings.
I never even thought of that.
You will see another number, which is 44.1. And the reason for that, according to legend, is that the chairman of Sony insisted that he personally listened to every piece of gear Sony made before it went into production so that he could evaluate it with his own golden ears. That part of the story is absolutely true. And it's why anything that was recorded or mixed on Sony gear starting from the late 70s up until the 90s starts getting brighter and brighter and brighter and more biased towards the high end because he was losing the top range of his hearing as he was pushing into his 80s.
Makes so much sense.
So that's like your easy listening rock. When you listen to it, it's like, man, those cymbals are like really, really popping.
Yeah.
But so he had his standard reference track was a particular recording of a Beethoven symphony that was 84 minutes long, and the maximum physical size of the CD had to be 12 centimeters because once you put a drive around it and all the equipment around it to make it to 12 centimeters was the maximum size you could have and still fit a CD player between the accessory rails on a typical Toyota, which is what the chairman drove. And so 12 centimeters at 48K won't hold 84 minutes. So according to legend, the engineers at Sony just kept turning the sample rate down until they could fit it all onto one disc, and that arrived at 44.1 kilohertz. That story is completely false.
I was hoping you would be able to tell this.
The real answer is a bit more mysterious and basically comes down to, we don't really know, but it probably came down to people trying to save costs in manufacturing because 48K timing circuits were so much more expensive than 44.1 essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where those two numbers come from on your sample, 44.1 and 48K. And then you have oversampling. So oversampling, 2x, 4x, sometimes you see 8x, is increasing the odds that your sample will occur at the maxima of the wave and the maximum and minima of the waveform. So you get less of that high frequency roll off, which you hear in the cymbals. The other thing you hear a lot with stereo, right, MP3s, is the phase starts to get weird between the left and the right channel. And that's where you'll start getting some weird compression artifacts in your cymbals where things will start to sound kind of like where there's like a phase applied to it.
I've noticed that, but I didn't know why that was.
And there's other compression artifacting that occurs that's essentially the audio equivalent of if you're watching like a pirated movie and you get those sort of different color grayscale black blocks that appear in like the black part of the screen.
Mm-hmm.
That's basically the symbol equivalent of that.
I always like thinking back to King of the Hill. Do I look like I know what a JPEG is? It's all
Exactly.
that compression.
There you go. There's
There's the reference.
There's an analogy for the kids these days. An MP3 is the JPEG of audio.
Yep. And
So
for those of you who maybe not sure what we're talking about, when we're talking about waveforms and everything, specifically sine waves, what you see right here, you should be able to see my mouse, is actually a sine wave, and it sounds like this. It's just one pure frequency. No additional harmonics or anything on top of it. And what this shape represents is if you draw a line right through the middle of this graph horizontally, that's 0, where your speaker is not moving, it's at a neutral state. When you go up, it is pushing out towards you, and as you come back down, it's retracting back into the box. So this is one complete cycle of this sound you're hearing. And
yeah, and this is a good graph to talk about the three main properties that a wave has. This is the really important physical thing to understand everything else that you do in analog digital signal processing, which is a wave has three properties. It has amplitude, so move your mouse up and down. Amplitude is how tall it is. right? That's your y-axis.
Let me actually represent that right here. This little dot represents each harmonic that I could play for this waveform. Right now, you can see there's only one, the fundamental, at max. So if I bring this down, okay, well, it scales it automatically for the visual, so you're not going to see it, but pretend that wave got smaller. Or actually,
Amplitude translates to volume or loudness of the wave, because that measures how much the speaker cone in a dynamic speaker is going to move. Or in a dynamic microphone, how much the diaphragm, or any microphone, how much the diaphragm moved when it was being recorded. So it's the distance that the diaphragm travels during its cycle. And on the wire, that translates to higher and lower maximum and minimum voltage, because an audio signal is AC.
And that's the part where I just defer to you when it comes to electrical. Just I don't know. I know how to make funny sounds on my synthesizers.
Well, we'll explain that once we get through this part.
Yeah, so it would be
that'll be a good opportunity to explain a dynamic microphone and a dynamic speaker.
Okay.
And the
second would
sorry,
be phase, would it not?
Second would be frequency.
Okay.
So frequency is your x-axis, basically. So that's your time axis, and that tells you basically how many times the wave goes up and down in every second, or how many complete cycles. So this graph is showing one complete cycle of a sine wave. It starts at zero, goes to maximum, returns to zero, goes to minimum, comes back to zero. Right? And that's one cycle. If you have one of those per second, that is 1 hertz, 1 cycle per second.
And I might actually be able to give a quick demonstration of this. A4 is 440 hertz per second. You're hearing this shape 440 times every second, which sounds exactly like this. If you move up 1 octave to A5, you're doubling that rate. So it would happen 880 times per second. It would go from this to this. And I'm sorry, if you look right at the top center of the screen, you'll see the waveform viewer up there. So you can see all those little waves moving, and then it suddenly gets much, much faster. It actually kind of looks like chaos when it's condensed down that small, but you get the point.
Yep. And then you have phase, so this cycle starts at 0, goes up, back to 0, back down. If we shift it left like this, left or right, that's phase. So it just translates the whole waveform forwards and backwards.
Just like I'm demonstrating right here now.
Yep. So that's your phase. And phase becomes really important when we're talking about stereo, when we're talking about live sound, so sound in the air. And so binaural beats, people who play around with binaural beats. Binaural beats is caused by a difference in frequency and kind of phase, but differences in frequency sometimes show up as differences in phase, or sound like it. Different coming in through your left ear versus your right ear. And when your brain tries to sum them, it kind of goes meh, and gives you that weird binaural beat, wow, 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 phaser effect. And there's actually a synthesizer effect called a phaser that just takes a primary and a secondary and phases them back and forth across each other to get that wah, wah, wah sound.
And isn't that also, because I work in the digital world, I think of phaser as slightly different, although I guess it is actually achieving that thing. Wouldn't that also be chorusing, though?
Yes. Chorusing plays with the harmonics a little bit. And so harmonics is a good thing to talk about, too. So the way you're describing it here, where you only have the primary tone, that sound can actually only exist on a wire. It cannot exist in air because as soon as you take a sound and put it into air, all of the harmonics are present. And the harmonics are present that each octave you go up or down is 6 dB less. It's a logarithmic decay. It's that decay pattern.
Let me actually pull up additive synthesizer because I might be able to show this pretty well in there too. Um, so on the right side, I have a spectral. Actually, you know what? I wanna show something really quick before we get too into the weeds with this. I actually pulled up those same samples we heard earlier, the wave versus MP3. I pulled them up
Mhm.
in separate spectrograms. For those of you unfamiliar, basically the x-axis represents time. The